Okay, all right. Well, I guess we pride ourselves in our semi-on-time departures here at Island Conservation Air. Hi, I'm Rachel Wadsworth. I'm the one who's sending you all these emails, so the face behind the emails, and you'll get more from me as we go on future journeys. But for today, I just wanted to say Yaurana, hello, and I want to welcome back all our returning travelers and also welcome our new guests. We started these island journeys together last spring when the world sort of changed very suddenly for all of us, and we enjoyed our time together. And here we are in the fall, and we're still traveling virtually. And I'm so happy that we can all try to enjoy an hour together, have an escape. I know it's tough for all of us right now, and there's fires and things. So I hope we can all try to, you know, set our minds off to the islands and enjoy this. I want to especially thank our co-hosts today, Tetiaroa Society, and I
Okay.
want to welcome their board and their guests. And thank you for joining us. And just before we begin, I want to make one more introduction before I hand over to my co-pilots. Say hello to Island Conservation CEO, Dr. Karen Poyani. Karen, can you wave?
Hi, Karen.
There's Karen. So now I'll leave you with my colleague, Penny Becker, to begin our journey. And I'm going to go ahead and mute everyone so we don't have interference while we're talking, but you can always unmute yourself, and please raise your hand or chat questions, and we'll at the end we'll have Q&A, and so just keep chatting your questions or comments throughout.
Okay.
Okay. All right.
All right. Welcome, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Can I get a thumbs up if you can hear me? All right. Excellent. I'm Dr. Penny Becker. I'm Regional Executive Director at Island Conservation, and I'm thrilled to be welcoming you all to our island journey. I'm one of your tour guides on our way to Tetiaroa, and we're going to be focusing on our science from ridge to reef today. If you're anything like me, you are really anxious to be getting on an airplane and to be heading someplace amazing like Tetiaroa. Maybe not as desperate to get on an airplane as this particular person, but today we'll do a virtual journey. Let's hop on our virtual airplane and we'll take a really short flight to the gorgeous area of French Polynesia. And as we come in for our landing, let's give you a little bit of an introduction to your host organizations. Island Conservation and Tetiaroa Society have formed an exciting partnership that we intend to carry on for many years to come. And our organization's vision for the future really fit together nicely. Island Conservation's mission is a simple one. We restore islands and remove invasive species to prevent extinctions. Continuing our work together to ensure that we can get rid of all of the rats from the rest of the atoll is really important, because the impact of invasive species can be devastating to the native habitats as well as to the flora and fauna that remain there. In fact, invasive species have been implicated in up to 86% of extinctions on islands. But we know that as soon as we remove these invasive species, really amazing things can happen. We expect that native trees can again flourish, and we see a rebound and abundance of land crabs like this one. And if you've caught our previous island journeys, you've heard about island restorations and the ability for removal of invasive species to help bring other species back from the brink of extinction. For sea turtles, like this little guy, invasive pigs and rats can devour up to 80% of them on the beaches before they make it to the water. So eradicating rats on Tetiaroa will allow this little guy to make it to the ocean and begin his life at sea. We also know that seabirds are one of the species that rebound the best when we remove invasive species. And although there's an increasing body of work that shows that that's one of the most impactful things that happens when we remove invasive species. Humans have found value in guano for hundreds of years and commercialized it, but a recent study shown that this white gold, as they call it, that remains in nature is worth up to $500 million a year. You'll hear from Dr. Vega Thurber about how healthy seabird populations, as well as the guano that they produce, can help to support things like this glorious ray, but more in particular, the coral reefs and the life, both big and small, that comes from them. Coral reefs are believed to have the highest biodiversity of any ecosystem throughout the entire world, even more than tropical rainforests. And they play a really important role in protecting islands from climate change impacts. So these things together make the conservation of coral reefs a priority, not just for the adjacent islands next to them, but really for the whole world. Tetiaroa Society and Island Conservation are really happy to be partnering with a talented group of researchers who are working to provide greater insight into the benefits of this restoration that we have on Tetiaroa that's ongoing now. And our research partners are really using Tetiaroa Atoll as a living laboratory. And together we're using this as a case study to better understand and to enhance island restorations for marine conservation. But the research here is not just for the benefit of Tetiaroa. The lessons that we're learning can apply globally, and they can help us to increase the scale and the pace of island restorations in tandem at the same time. This opens up many more opportunities to help native plants and animals both above and below water, and of course the people and communities that rely upon these ecosystems that are worldwide. So now that you've been oriented to the importance of our work and we've arrived at our beautiful destination, I will leave you in the capable hands of Frank and Hinano for an exploration of Tetiaroa's incredible landscape and culture. Take it away, Frank.
Thanks, Penny. Okay, I'm trying to advance. Here we go. Okay, so welcome everybody. We're now in French Polynesia and the Society Islands, and normally most people who come here, they go to Tahiti, they go to Bora Bora, they might go to Moorea, but we're going to head up to the small atoll of Tetiaroa, just 40 miles north of Tahiti. So here's Tetiaroa. It's a typical, beautiful atoll, South Pacific atoll. It's got a barrier reef surrounding it, a beautiful lagoon in the middle, and then 12 beautiful little coral islets laid out in a ring around the lagoon. The only motu, these islets in Polynesian language are called motu, and motu Onatahi is the only one where people live, and this is the location of the Brando Resort and all of the infrastructure that's associated with that, including the headquarters of Tetiaroa Society. All the rest of the atoll, all the rest of the islets there are a private nature reserve, and the island is a privately owned island. And it is such because Marlon Brando bought it in the 1960s. And Marlon had a dream of what he could do with this island. And he really wanted to make sure that it was preserved. And he had the idea that he could use tourism and bring some money in and then support scientific research and education programs and conservation programs. And this is basically what we're trying to do today. We're continuing Marlon's dream. We're building on that. We're doing a new version of it, modern version, and we're all really happy to have had to be furthering his legacy. Tetiaroa Society has facilities on the island where we can support research. We have an eco station that was donated to us by the Brando Resort, and boats. And we also have a team of guides that lead tours for the Brando Resort guests, and we're able to teach them about the nature and culture of the island and engage them in our programs. We also have a great team, a great staff on the island who manage the eco station, And here's a picture of some of our staff, not in uniform. I usually take nice pictures of them in uniform, but in this case, they just came out of the bush. There's staff there, there's volunteers, and there's Island Conservation's Badouin Lamonstier there on the left, who is leading them through the bush on heavy work on rat eradication on Motu Onatahi. So we have a great team on the island that takes care of all the work that we do. I should say the Tetiaroa Society doesn't exist really without the partnerships that we have. Our local partners, the Brando family estate, the community, of course. We can't really do anything without the cooperation and participation of the community. And then Pacific Beachcomber and the owners of the Brando and all that they do for us in their support. Also, of course, we have great research and conservation partners around the world, and I just listed some of them there. So just to go through our programs quickly, our scientific research programs span researchers from around the world. I have just a couple of them here. On the left, that's the University of Washington team that's working on a great project on ocean acidification. On the right, that's Hervé Bossin from the University of French Polynesia, who has a great mosquito abatement program, very successful mosquito abatement program on Tetiaroa. We also have a wonderful education program that brings in kids from Tahiti and Moorea. And we bring them over there for about 5 days per group, and they learn about nature and culture of the island. And then they also learn about sustainable development with the hotel as the classroom. So it's really a wonderful program that they take back to the community. And then, of course, we have our conservation programs. And you've heard a little bit about the turtle program. Hinano Temuana has been doing that for several years, monitoring green sea turtles on the island. But really our major program right now, our flagship program, is the habitat restoration, which impacts everything. And I'd just like to make the case in the next few minutes for the restoration of Tetiaroa. There are, I'm making the case basically for the natural systems, and then Hinano will talk about the cultural. But for the natural systems, we have 11 native seabirds, native birds that are nesting on Tetiaroa, and we have another 4 birds that are transient species, also native. And this is really one of the only islands in the Society Islands, and certainly in the Windward Society Islands, that is really okay for these birds, good place for these birds to nest and to visit. It has very few human impacts, as I mentioned. The main thing right now are invasive species, and the main invasive species, of course, is rats. So we really need to get rid of rats, and it'll really enhance these bird populations. This goes, of course, also for the green sea turtles. As has been mentioned, the nesting, or the green sea turtle hatchlings coming out of their nests are picked up by the rats on the beach, and this is a huge impact. Something else that actually nicely earlier on in the conversation before our talk, Dov was there to say that we might be able to use Tetiaroa as a refuge for native endemic birds. And I think this is a huge possibility for Tetiaroa. Once we get rid of invasive species, in particular rats, we should be able to bring back birds that are endangered. This is the blue lorikeet, which is found only on rat-free islands in the Tuamotu. It's a beautiful, active little bird. It'd be magical to have this on Tetiaroa. Also, we have the Tuamotu sandpiper, down to about 1,000 individuals. And really, really great bird, and it would be wonderful to be able to bring this bird back on Tetiaroa. And then the sandpiper is endangered. This bird is critically endangered. This is the Polynesian ground dove, and there's only about 100 individuals left in the world. And this bird, and all of them actually, their range used to include Society Islands and Tetiaroa. It would be great to have them back there. And in particular, on Tetiaroa, where community would have access to see these birds, and not just community, but people from around the world. And I think that would be a huge boost for conservation programs. And lastly, the coral reefs. So Becky's going to talk in more detail about the coral reefs, but we all know the coral reefs around the world are endangered by climate change, and many of them are already in bad shape. A recent study of coral reefs around the world identified a portfolio of regions which long-term coral reef conservation investment might be least subject to impacts from climate change. That is, they identified which islands are still in relatively good shape that are worth saving, almost a triage in a sense. And the global strategy might be to protect these important areas from local non-climate change threats. In this study, the coral reefs of French Polynesia, and specifically those of the Society Islands, came out in the top 10%. So Tetiaroa, being a private island, has all the ingredients for a place that we can really have an impact. It has minimal impact so far, aside from the invasive species that we need to deal with. We can fix it, we can make it resilient to climate change, and it can act as a refugia for coral reefs and also for other native species. So now I'll turn it over to Hinano to talk about the cultural importance of habitat restoration. And I should note that, most of the time in French Polynesia, I'm known as Hinano Murphy's husband. So I get to introduce her today as my wife. My wonderful.
Thank you.
Okay. Sorry about that. Oh, I'm sorry. We'll get it right here in a minute.
Leorana and Maiva in Tetiaroa. What you just heard was a traditional song called Taraba, written for the children coming to Tetiaroa for education program. This song spoke of the natural richness and beauty of Tetiaroa, a privileged place, allowing us to walk in the footsteps of the spirit of the land, the ocean, of the sky, and our great ancestors, whose wisdom and great values has helped to keep this place still so pristine. This song is a call from our community to our children. It says, before setting any course for any great journey, for your future, find your seat in the canoe of your community. Look at each place, each motu of Tetiaroa. Survey as much as you can of the view of your island and weave them in a comprehensive mat that you will use when needed, and stay connected with your ancestors, with your land. This is kind of a messy slide, but this map of Tetiaroa shows of all the toponyms. And as you know, the toponyms for us are witness of the great knowledge and deep attachment of the inhabitants to their aya, to their land, family of residential group, or more generally to their whenua. As toponyms are almost unchanged since the contact, European contact, they show the levels of interest and detailed knowledge of different places of Tetiaroa. They are relevant, important to understand traditional practices and sustainable uses of different spaces, land, ocean, or a different species at different times of our lunar calendar. Respect, humility, unity, and equity are key words for the community for good governance and resource management to ensure sustainability of local resources on this one and continuing place, land, ocean. Education and community. Education and community actions are great means to ensure good rahui, good governance for our future island. Rahui is a traditional method of managing natural resources. It helps to strengthen the link between the community and their space, and their island, and the connection across oceanic people. Today, more than ever, the rahui is one of the ways of achieving an objective of sustainable development and preservation of marine resources. Let's consider it. And remember, it is also and above all to be able to assert and defend the cultural identity of Polynesian communities. We all need to weave local knowledge with scientific knowledge in a useful carousel to use in mutual respect, to let the wisdom of our ancestors and the scientific spirit be expressed together for the successful management of our heritage, of our island, and in a broader way, of our beautiful planet Earth. We were taught we are part of nature. We depend on nature. Let's all help nature to teach humanity a sustainable way of life.
Thanks, Hinano. It's great. So Hinano and I have tried to make the case for both the natural and cultural preservation of Tetiaroa. But as Penny mentioned, the goal of this project is larger than just Tetiaroa. And this is a map that an old coral reef scientist named Charles Darwin made in 1842. And it shows coral reefs around the world, at least as far as he knew them at the time. The dark blue dots are atolls. And the plan for this project would be to use it as a model and export it to all of the other reef islands around the world. So now to transition from one old coral reef scientist to a much younger coral reef scientist, I'm happy to pass on the presentation to Dr. Rebecca Vega Thurber.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Frank, and thank you, Hinano and Penny, for that beautiful introduction. It was so inspiring, and are you guys all inspired? Wasn't that beautiful? I hope you were as emotionally drawn to those images and those songs as I was. I've been lucky enough to visit the atoll of Tetiaroa just recently, and I feel the spirit through those images. And what I'm going to talk to you today about is the things that Frank and Hinano and Penny spoke about, but particularly in terms of connecting what we know about island restoration to what we are trying to learn about ocean restoration. So I'm a marine biologist by training and a microbiologist. And these are the habitats that I'm used to working in, these beautiful coral reefs that are adjacent to a lot of the atolls that you've seen. And coral reefs are highly biodiverse systems, as mentioned by Penny. They are home to about 25% of all marine species, at least at some point in their lifetime. And they help the economy and culture and identity of islands around the world. And they foster food and local security to all of these nations worldwide. But unfortunately, they're under threat. And one of the things that we aim to study during the rat eradication is how this process of invasive rat removal can ultimately cascade down to the ocean level and help preserve our marine ecosystem simultaneously. So you heard about white gold, and this little guy here, he's white gold. These birds, they provide an important nutrient subsidy, we think, to these corals alongside them. So what we're trying to study broadly in terms of restoring islands is how they might also restore reefs through the preservation of these important and often endangered species, the birds of islands and atolls around the world. So this is some drone footage of the island of Moorea, 40 miles nearby. And what you should see when you see this drone footage is the beauty and bounty of these locations. But primarily one of the things that's iconic about tropical reefs is this crystal clear blue water. And this crystal clear blue water is the result of a lack of primary nutrition in the sea. So what do I mean by that? Any gardeners here? Anyone grow vegetables? Yeah, I see some hands raised. Well, what do you gotta do? You gotta feed those plants because they need nutrition. The same is true in marine ecosystems where nitrogen and phosphorus species are required to form the base of the food web and drive biodiversity. But marine atolls and tropical locations, they lack this primary nutrition. And yet, despite that, they're highly biodiverse. So why is that? If we go back to Tetiaroa from Moorea, we can again see these crystal clear blue waters. And we know that on these adjacent land masses, these motu, there are marine species that help spur the fertilization of the local ecosystem. And those primary animals are birds. And the reason is because these birds, they go offshore, they forage in the rich marine ecosystem, and they bring back nutrition in the form of their guano. So when they go off, they eat the fish, they come back and they poop the remaining part of the fish, and that washes out into the ecosystem. And so what we're trying to understand is that causal link. So Tetiaroa Society and Island Conservation have been working together to help fund some basic information about this connection between land conservation and reef conservation. And myself and a number of scientists have been monitoring the local ecosystem before and now during the eradication, and we hope to evaluate the effects of this eradication in the long term in the future. So again, the major connection we're trying to understand is if you remove bird species through invasive species addition, how does that affect the local ecosystem? And the eradication is doing a natural experiment for us. By the removal of rats, we can now see how the increase in the abundance of bird species and additional species perhaps on the land can then move into the marine ecosystem. So where do we come from this? So there's some scientific basis for this information. Researchers in the Chagos archipelago in the Indian Ocean noticed that when they went to different islands that contained rats, there was very few bird species, and the populations of those birds was dramatically reduced compared to islands that had no rats, as shown here. So the darker colors means more bird species on the islands with no rats. They also made the observation that those islands that had rats had very low primary nutrition in the local seawaters. But those islands that were adjacent, those reefs that were adjacent to islands that didn't have rats and thus more bird species had dramatically more primary nutrition in the local reef waters. And theoretically, this should spur an increase in production of species and increase biodiversity directly. They also showed that there was a distance to shore effect. So here, if you look on the island from this figure, you can see that on the island, there's a lot of nitrogen, one of the main types of nutrition that we care about when we think about these nutrition sources. And that this specific kind of nitrogen was directly coming from birds. This is a stable isotope measure, a scientific measure that can link what species is actually providing that nutrition. They also found that there was kind of a distance to shore effect, that essentially islands that had rats had reduced amounts of nutrition even out on the reef flat compared to those that didn't have rats, and even more so out on the reef crest. So there's quite a bit of effect on the presence of birds on these primary nutrients. So what does this matter for the science that's going on Tetiaroa? So scientists from all over the world are trying to take a unique perspective on how we can study this. Traditionally, marine ecology and island and land ecology is done separately. What we really want to do is come together to look at the super ecosystem, if you will, by taking an ecosystem level approach where we track what happens on land, what happens on sea, and to connect them in our research. So we're looking at plants, we're looking at marine invertebrates, land invertebrates, and the marine species that exist both within that lagoon and outside of the atoll itself. And this is kind of our working model. I'm going to go through this schematic here. So again, islands that have these invasive species, such as rats, they alter the land ecosystem by foraging the native species of plants and removing important species like birds through the consumption of eggs or birds directly. And this can alter the local marine ecosystem by altering the input of different compounds like nutrients or through rat poop directly. Now this has a whole bunch of cascading effects. It will alter the local marine plankton, and then ultimately that plankton is not nutritious enough, alter the marine ecosystem directly by poisoning it, for example, or altering the nutrients that the corals and fishes need to grow. If those rats are removed, we expect ultimately that the foliage will return, the native plant species will create habitat for birds. Those birds will repopulate, you'll get larger populations and different species. And then ultimately, those will poop into the water and change the marine ecosystem by providing that nutrient subsidy through guano. This can spur plankton, and then ultimately that plankton can feed large megafauna like these manta rays, but it can also help corals grow and resist climate change, and I'll talk about that in a second. I just saw in the chat, what is omics? I will mention that in a couple slides, but real quick, it's the use of DNA or RNA, different kinds of nucleic acids that every organisms contain to track the things that we can't see. So that's what I do. I study genomics. I use DNA to track microbial species, the microbiomes of the sea, if you will, and then ultimately we can look at even larger species based on the DNA that they leave behind. Okay, so what are different scientists doing? So we have a whole collection of people. I can't talk about everybody's research, but I'm just going to highlight a few. So this is some work to track the bird populations. This is Beth Gardner and Sarah's work from University of Washington, where they're looking at bird species populations. They're tracking their songs. Bird species songs that they could track using the red-footed boobies, the terns, and the noddies as well. So all this music that comes from the birds. You've heard about the turtle programs where we're tracking nesting of juvenile turtles and the nests that are present, and tracking how the presence or absence of rats might affect these nesting sites. We're tracking sharks through use of acoustic arrays in the lagoon to see where the sharks are and what their population sizes are. And we're also looking at invertebrate species, what different types of crabs and other large invertebrates, and also plant and insect species that are present and in what populations and densities before, during, and after the eradications. One of the really important things that I'm very excited about with this project is that as scientists, we're often looking for areas that we can make the most impact. And one of the things we haven't been able to do is make this connection between land and sea. And the reason for that is historical because of siloing of different disciplines. But what we're really hoping here is as a team, we can really track how the effects on land affect the sea. And so this is a video of the work that we do. This is looking at the coral reefs on the bottom. And so you see that there's all these fish species or these beautiful corals and different diversity of them. And so we want to know how the bird repopulation of birds might change the composition and growth rates of these beautiful corals and how that might help biodiversity and productivity in the long term. And one of the reasons we're really concerned about this is because, as Frank mentioned, climate change is changing these ecosystems. This is a bleaching event that occurred in 2019 that killed a lot of the different coral species, the acropods and postaloporid corals. And we want to be able to show that nutrient enrichments from these bird populations can essentially help these corals be resilient to these kinds of changes. Because when you think about it, bleaching is really a starvation process. These corals no longer have the algae that helps them grow. But if they have additional nutrition from bird deposition of nutrients, then perhaps they can survive these starvation events and be resilient in the face of climate change. So these are some of the researchers who are doing the marine science, myself and a variety of other scientists from French Polynesia, the Smithsonian, and UC Santa Barbara and Lancaster University, where we're all trying to track specifically the nutrients from land to see how they affect the sea and the marine species. For example, Mayalin Zubia from University of Polynesia is looking at the algae and the cyanobacteria effects of the eradication. Chris Meyer from Smithsonian is looking at invertebrates and restoration of invertebrate species and biodiversity in these habitats. And then Darren, Nick, and I are looking at the fish and the corals. So just to give you an example, we were just lucky enough to get a small grant from the Tetiaroa Society to visit Tetiaroa and take some of the first samples before the eradication. So my team and other teams, we visited all of the different motu, collected water, collected corals, collected algae to track differences in the microbiology and chemistry of that seawater. Because we really want to show cause and effect, that when you remove these invasive species, you see concomitant changes or direct changes in the marine ecosystem thereafter. And so for my part, we use, like I said, omics to track this. So again, so this is our model, and as scientists, we're trying to prove, again, cause and effect. And why does that matter? That matters because if we can prove cause and effect, then managers and lawmakers, they can show that the effective conservation of land is also an effective measure of conserving the local ecosystem, the marine ecosystem as well. And that has major implications for the preservation of islands around our planet. So just to conclude, the real concept behind the science that we're trying to do is an ecosystem level, super ecosystem, if you will, looking at land and sea. And ultimately, this data can help us provide information to managers to preserve these places in the long term and help conserve not just the ecosystem, but the culture that's associated with these important habitats and islands. Thank you. I think I'm handing it back to who? Penny?
Back to Penny, yes. All right, thank you so much, Dr. Vega Thurber. We're really excited about this research, especially the cross-disciplinary work that's going on right now and the case study that we're going to be able to make with the restoration on Tetiaroa. It'll show us how we can maximize our ability to restore the islands for both the island's sake as well as for coral reefs. And we're hoping it can help to mainstream island restoration as a really important tool for ocean conservation globally. Our vision is for healthy islands teeming with birds and other abundant wildlife that, of course, supports healthy coral reefs like this and abundant marine life, and of course the local islands and communities that rely upon the resources for food security, food health, and thriving economies. As you've heard from Frank and Hinano and from Dr. Vega Thurber, restoring that land to sea linkage is never more important than right now. This project is a really important step to help make our reefs and our islands more resilient to climate change, to help fight off the extinction of some of our most amazing and charismatic species, and of course to support the communities that cherish and rely upon these islands and the ecosystems around them. I want to pause and take a moment to especially thank our supporters and partners. It's your support that has made our success thus far possible. Even while most of the world seemed to stop turning in 2020, we've already been able to restore 2 of the motu on Tetiaroa. And thank you so much. It's your support that has kept us moving forward, and it's really heartening to know that you'd stayed with us throughout. We've used this year to adjust our methods to make sure that in 2021 we can finish this project despite any of the challenges that really come our way. But we have a whole lot more work to do, and we need new supporters and more support in order to complete the project in 2021 and to get our researchers out on the ground looking at the exciting changes that are soon to come. We have about 75% of Tetiaroa left that still have rats that we need to remove. And our funding gap is $125,000 to complete the work and get our researchers on the ground. We hope that you guys, just like us, have been inspired by the stories and by the island and by the culture and the creatures, and certainly by the research that's going on around this project, and hope that you'll join our team in order to get this work accomplished. We hope that you'll visit birdstoreef.org. There you'll find some more resources and information on the project and learn how to join our team. And I think we're at the point now where we will have plenty of time for some Q&As.
Thank you, everyone. That was so wonderful. I enjoyed all that so much. Beautiful sights and sounds to carry us all away. And thank you for sharing all that important work. So if you want to chat, or you can actually unmute yourselves if you want to talk. And we would love to have some questions. In addition to those who have presented, we have a number of scientists that Becky mentioned as being partners that are working on the Tetiaroa restoration project. So they will also be available to answer questions, and they'll jump on as their specialty is asked about. So who wants to ask a question, chat or live?
I have a question. I was curious if there are control islands or anything that you're comparing against to tease apart, large-scale environmental changes versus just changes to the from the intervention.
That's a great question. I guess I'm going to kind of divert some of that, but to talk about, we're doing a comparative study on the island of Palmyra with funds from Island Conservation and the Nature Conservancy to essentially compare the eradication there versus the eradication there. For us, we're looking at currently the differences in the biological parameters on motu that have rats currently and motu that were either eradicated recently or were in the process of eradication. So we have time measures across that way. We don't necessarily have parallel island systems to directly look at that effect. So not a true control, but our time is one of our controls. And then the stage at which the motus have been eradicated is another one of our controls. And then hopefully Palmyra will be a similar system where we can replicate the experiment.
Great. Bonnie has a question. Bonnie, do you want to, you can unmute yourself. There you are.
I'm unmuted. Thank you all for an absolutely fabulous and fascinating webinar. I learned a lot that I didn't know at all. My question is, and I apologize, I came in late, if you already answered this, what method is being used to eradicate the rats? How is that being carried out? Or has it been planned yet?
Yes, it is being planned, and it's also been carried out to some extent. As Penny mentioned, we've already done 2 of the motu on Tetiaroa, and the rats are being eradicated by using poison, and potentially, maybe Richard might give more detail on that, but it's basically the same method that IC uses on other islands and around the world.
All right. Okay, thanks.
So I have this is Mark. I have a follow-up question to that. I saw James Russell earlier. Are we worried that the rats are gonna swim from one of the islands to one of the eradicated islands if they are still there?
Go for it, James.
Yeah, we've been undertaking some genetic studies and long-term studies on the rats for the past decade, and we've worked out what the so-called eradication meta-units are, so we've circled off those islands. And so in 2018, we eradicated rats from Raiono in the southeast, which stands alone, and this winter we've just eradicated them off Onatahi and Honowea, which are another pairing. And so now we've got 2 pairings left on the atoll, the Rimatu'u Island at the southern end, and then the northwest chain where they're all linked up and the rats are swimming back and forth. So we have to do those all at one time to achieve rat eradication.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask the same question about the swimming, because on the Haida Gwaii project, we learned that rats can swim easily 3 to 4 kilometers in frigid waters. And so is this a whack-a-mole problem in that we'll get rid of them on islands A and B or motos A and B, then switch to looking at C and D, only to find a bunch have gone back to A and B. And so would this be a call for a bigger funding push so all the motos can be done all at once and, you know, full-scale eradication, as opposed to a possibility of chasing islands in a permanent circle?
I think that's great,
That's
Andy. I think yes.
That's a good question, Andy. Yeah, and the plan was, of course, in 2020 to.
For more donations. Sorry, folks.
The plan in 2020 was to take the rats off the entire atoll at once, but unfortunately, we know 2020 played out as it has, and so we dialed back the planning and just focused on doing a ground-based eradication on Onatahi and Honowea and completing them in 2021. The exciting opportunity we have here is that having eradicated the rats off Onatahi and Honowea, we can now try to hold them and see if there's a reinvasion from Te Araunu before we get to that next year. So we've got a line of trail cameras monitoring for rats reinvading, and it's really going to give us an ability to develop our science around preventing rat reinvasion at the same time. So just another great example of how we're doing the conservation on Tetiaroa, but we're also delivering the science that we can roll out to all those other atolls around the world that Frank identified.
That's great. Thank you so much. We have Anne has raised her hand with a question, so I want to get to her. And then we have Grace and Dan has a question. So Anne, do you want to ask your question?
Hi, everybody. Are the birds there resident all year long, or are there times of years when you can work with fewer birds and thus have fewer bird rat poison interactions?
I might take that. So the nesting birds are there all year long, but none of those eat rat poison. They're all seabirds and a reef heron, and so they wouldn't eat the rat poison. And the other birds are migratory, and the timing that we prefer for the rat eradication is our winter, which is a time when those birds are, some of them are around and some of them are not, but it's not really a problem for those either. So in fact, we're lucky on Tetiaroa that there's virtually no animals there that are adversely affected by the rat eradication program.
Thank you.
Great. Grace has a question in the chat. She says, do you think that bird poop can revive the coral symbiotic algae, or will it work directly with the coral tissue?
That's a great question. So in addition to the monitoring we're doing experiments at the research station as well, asking those direct questions. So we just did an experiment where we added the chemical composition of bird poop to corals in aquaria to see how the symbiotic algae change. And so we're undergoing those analyses now, but other labs have shown that when you add bird poop to specific coral species, they grow faster. And that's probably through the mechanism of the algae growing faster and providing more primary nutrition to the corals. So great question, and that's an ongoing study.
Great. We have a question from Dan. Dan, do you want to ask Dan Zimberloff, former Island Conservation Board member and emeritus?
Yeah. Are there house mice on any of the islands, especially the inhabited islands?
Not that we know of.
Sometimes they're discovered when you don't know them after you eradicate rats. I guess you're aware of that. And then they become a problem also for seabirds and other animals.
Yeah, great point, Dan. We, of course, are very conscious of house mice and their potential to be there. But on many of these tropical atolls, we do not find mice present. They seem to be more common in temperate locations. That's not to say they don't exist in some tropical locations.
Great.
Thank you. Thanks, Richard. And this is Richard Griffiths, who just answered a question, joining us from New Zealand. He's an island conservation person who actually oversees this the work that we're talking about. We have a very important question, Bernie, in the chats, which is whether people are serious about if the sharks eat some of the rats as they're swimming. It's very important.
I can
question.
say in 2010, I did do some trials where we were taking the many dead rats we were catching in the traps and throwing them out into the water as, I guess, returning the nutrients back there. And it was interesting to see that the reef sharks weren't that interested in certainly dead rats floating there. So it would be an interesting investigation to see what the interception rate of live rats swimming between the motu is. But I'm not sure the sharks are that interested in them because it's an unfamiliar food source to them, really.
So we have gourmet sharks, gourmet appetites in the sharks, because they go to the Brando and they get the best. So I mean, why would you expect anything less? Let's see. We have a lot of questions. Are there genomic techniques that could be tested similar to what's being done with mosquitoes? I think we're covering that a little bit in the chat, and that's yes. If you go to GBird, there's a link there to the GBird project, which is a genetic technology project that is being tested with rodents. So it is similar in some ways to that mosquito project. Let's see, lots of talk about swimming. Oh, ketchup, someone suggested ketchup. Okay, thank you. And let's see, oh, what types of nutrients are found in the bird poop? Nitrogen must be the main one, but is magnesium also one of them?
So I'm not a chemist, but we have our collaborator at Lancaster University. They actually quantify all the different chemical parts of the rat poop. And I know that there's nitrogen species, there are phosphorus species. There might be these limiting micronutrients like magnesium or iron that are important in atolls. They tend to be less important on islands because those are readily available from especially volcanic islands, high islands like Moorea and Tahiti. So they'd be less important in those ecosystems, but on atolls they might be important. But great question, and I wish I knew offhand, but I know someone knows.
Okay, we'll get that information out. Question about, I missed the first time around. When did rats first arrive to the atoll?
James?
I can answer that. We went through the historical records about a decade ago when we first started researching the rats. And there's two species of rats on the island, the Polynesian rat, Pacific rat, actually native to Southeast Asia, which arrived with the Polynesian voyages as they spread out from Asia through Papua New Guinea and out and colonized the Polynesian chain. So they've certainly been there for hundreds of years. And this rat species was found on all and is still found on some of the motu of Tetiaroa. Around about the 1960s and 70s, workers on the island started to record a more tree climbing species of rat. And when we assessed the rats in 2010, we found that was the black rat or the ship rat, also the most widespread rat species in the world. And that arrived then and colonized Onatahi and then spread by swimming using the genetic studies I talked about earlier up the northwest chain. So it wasn't found on Raiono and the Rimatu'u, it spread up around the northwest chain. So there's two species of rat on the island. And what we're doing is analyzing them separately. And again, for the science, this is a really exciting opportunity because there's kind of different types of islands, one with one species of rat and one with both. So we can see how this impacts the ecosystem functioning from the land to the sea, as well as learn about how we eradicate these species better from islands.
Wow, thanks, James. I'm glad we have you with us today. I'm glad you hopped on the stowaway on our journey here today. We have a question from Hervé.
Yeah, I'd like to have the big picture from you guys at Island Conservation. My question is with regard to how many islands do you have, tropical, humid islands, that are undergoing rat eradication today in the Pacific and other oceans, maybe in the Indian Ocean or elsewhere, that will allow you to do some comparison, research and experimentations and address this whole issue of the ecosystems functioning from birds to reef?
Well, that's a good question. Always the tough questions from Eve. We have, just to provide a simple answer, we are working on dozens of atolls, Eve, across the Pacific, but also elsewhere. we have not had the resources to channel the level of investment into the research as Tetiaroa Society has done on Tetiaroa and on Palmyra with the work that the Nature Conservancy have done. But we would very much like to expand the research and the restoration effort. And French Polynesia would be just a wonderful place to do that. And we did have great grand plans, didn't we, Becky, to run an experimental control, a grand experiment with controls across the Tuamotus, which I'd still like to see take place. And yeah, only through really doing that will we get the unique insights that we could do into this terrestrial marine interaction.
Great. Well, we're nearing. You know, you can fasten your seatbelts because we can feel it's getting bumpy. We're starting to come in for our landing. But as we circle and you turn off your video, does anyone have any final questions or words they'd like to share? I'd like to say thank you and wish you all the best for your journeys and invite you to join us next week and then the following for journeys. Next week, we're going to stay in this very large area of the world, and we're going to Ulithi and Palau, so that will be really exciting, and we hope you all can join us for that. And then does anyone have a final question, a quick one?
I had another question. So what will it take in terms of permitting to bring the endangered species of birds to the islands from, once the rats are eradicated?
Frank, do you want to field that?
Yeah, we'd be working with partners here on that. There's a local ornithological organization, SOP Manu, who's done this already. And they're partners with us on what we do on Tetiaroa. So I can't answer the exact details on the permitting, but it's already been done and we'd be following, that model. Yeah.
Thank you.
Great, wonderful. All right, well, everyone, thank you so much. You guys are all leaving wonderful comments. We appreciate you all. We appreciate all your time and attention and you taking time out of your day. We hope you feel it's been a great way to spend some time. We'll be sending some follow-up information. We'll be sending follow-up information about bird poop. If anyone's interested in the chemical content and other if any of these questions didn't get thoroughly answered, you can email me. I'll pass it on to any of the presenters. But for now, I'll say goodbye, and I'll leave this open for a little bit if anyone still wants to chat or communicate in the chat or talk. But officially goodbye, and we will see you next week. Next week, it's 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, and we'll hope to see everyone. Bye.
Thanks for joining, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.